Tonight's discussion is titled Unheard Voices, the Migrant Female Experience in the UK. With that title, the unheard voices from the particular challenge, I hope. Between all of us in the room this evening, we can make all of these voices heard. Do you think you're unheard? And if you weren't an unheard voice, why weren't you an unheard voice?
Well, I was, because this is the time when... Is this okay? Is this hanging around my face bit? This is the time of Enoch Powell. You're all too young here to remember what that was like. Not only were we unheard, we wanted to be unheard and unseen, because everywhere you went, there were people who thought Enoch Powell was a hero, so you didn't want to be in the public space at all. It was really difficult. You wanted to hide. And that is true of the early Jewish people who came here, that they changed their names, they didn't tell their stories. So in a sense, yes, it was I was unheard, but that was a strategy, that was a survival strategy.
How has Birmingham changed as a city, and how easy is it for migrants to settle there now?
Well, I was born and brought up in an inner city area of Birmingham, Small Heath, which, you know, if I set the scene with what's happening today, which has now basically become a bit of an ISIS recruiting ground. So, you know, it makes me wonder as to what's happening there, and, you know, why the situation is the way it is. You know, when I was growing up in Birmingham, we didn't have faith schools. We didn't have conferences about religion. We didn't have girls wearing headscarves. I come from a Muslim background too. So it makes me really wonder as to you know, what's really going on in society. And I think a lot of progress has been made in terms of, you know, settling and integration over the years. But I think over recent years we've been backpedaling, and I think, you know, I think it shows the way society is today, basically. Lots has changed.
And I guess Brexit is one of the things that illustrates the point that you're making. Khalid, you were initially a Leaver. You were part of the Leave campaign, but you changed your mind. How do you think the Brexit vote has affected migrants coming in? And why did you change your mind as well?
Well, first of all, the reason why I changed my mind is I'm a strong believer that we should be working with the Commonwealth. I think a lot of the money we spend on aid, it doesn't really have a legacy. And what I wanted to do is us to trade with the Commonwealth. That was my reason for Leave and being in that. I left the Leave campaign basically because of this xenophobic attitude towards the whole campaign. When they put up the passport, the British passport at the door with 700 million Turks, 720 million Turks coming through that door, was totally bizarre, and I wasn't going to stand for that. So that's the reason why I left them. I think in terms of Brexit, it is actually taken. There's two things actually I just want to quickly go through. One, with the current refugee crisis, and that is, I think, first of all, a major thing that we haven't addressed at all. No leadership in Europe has addressed that, and that is the biggest problem, because people were allowed to come through Greece, wherever they came through. They walked through the Balkans, whatever they did, they came through. Nobody decided to have a campaign, had a strategy to deal with that. Nobody decided that these people needed some support, they were coming over. People decided that these people were going to drown in the seas when they were put on these hideous boats by these people traffickers, and people were dying. To date, we don't know how many people have actually died through that. So that was a complete incompetence by the whole of the European Union in terms of leadership and trying to deal with that. And then when they came here, what happened? There was sexual exploitation of women, of young girls, abduction of boys, and all sorts of things, and criminal activities against a huge number of those people. We didn't look after them. We're supposed to be a civilized society, as we keep on calling ourselves. So we have a real issue to examine ourselves in terms of what's happening. And what we've done in terms of Brexit is made that a big issue, because it's all these refugees coming in, it's all this immigration that's coming in. It's all bad for us. Forgetting the fact, since the Second World War, I came to this country because my great-grandfather was a merchant seaman in the British Navy. My grandfather was a merchant seaman in the Navy, and they settled in Newcastle when they came up. We contributed towards the United Kingdom. And then my father came in 1948, and we've been here ever since because of that. We had ties, and what we've done, and a lot of people do when they come here, is contribute to the economy. And that's been proven and that's been done. But we have this through Brexit. We have this xenophobic huge campaign against all the refugees coming up. We were supposed to work providing, looking at 3,000 children coming through. The government never stuck to that, let alone anybody else. So we've had a huge negative impact on Brexit. We've had, not just in terms of migration, in terms of refugees that are coming through, a huge block put up. And that takes away the humanity of what we are. And that is the biggest problem we've had.
Yasmin, you've been shaking your
I
head
just
and
want to
nodding
pick up
through
on
that.
one point Khalid said, which I think is very important, that I think Black and Asian Britons need to be very careful not to fall for the hierarchies that were created over Brexit. The deserving and the undeserving, you know, the deserving poor, the undeserving poor. And I have been quite shocked, actually, to see how many Asians in particular, including my relatives, are xenophobic about Eastern Europeans and fell for the lies that Daniel Hannan and all of them told them. They went into these places and they said, you know, oi, if the Poles don't come, your brother-in-law from Bangladesh can come in.
Yeah.
It was a lie.
Yeah.
And I'm so embarrassed that after all these years here, we didn't feel the solidarity we should have felt with people who were not like us. I don't buy this nonsense about, oh, we're the deserving, we had a relationship with this country. We had a colonial relationship with this country. We're an international world now. And I absolutely think that because, you know, that old poem, the old poem, I can't remember who said they first came for the trade unionists, they came for, and then they came for me. Well, we are not immune from the xenophobia, although we participated in it. And I do think that MPs like yourself and all the MPs of colour have a real duty to say, we are part of them, and we will not be part of us until we treat everybody right. And you're right about the children, absolutely right.
Julie, you're from you represent the North West as an MEP. The North West predominantly voted to leave, apart from Manchester, the city. How was the Brexit vote sort of interpreted in your area?
Liverpool voted to remain because Liverpool had been completely forgotten about by the British government and was rescued by the EU. And the people in Liverpool understand absolutely that their success as a city is because of the EU. It's certainly not because of what happens here in Westminster. And many of the communities in the Northwest, if you break it down, actually voted to remain. They didn't vote to leave, or you know, they kind of understood. First of all, I just want to say something about the EU and about refugees. Okay, we don't have a refugee crisis in Europe. We have a crisis of solidarity. And our country, this country, is one of the countries that's never ever shouldered its the burden. It's let other countries do it. So it's let Germany do it. It's let Sweden do it. It's let Spain do it. It's let other countries do its dirty work, and it's never shouldered its responsibility properly. Now, one of the things that I do as an MEP is go on missions to other countries with my committee so I can learn about best practice. And I went with the FEM committee, with the Women's Rights Committee, to see how Germany welcomed refugees, particularly women refugees, and we're talking about women tonight. And I use the word welcomed because that is exactly what they are doing. They have tailored policies, and they are making facilities and welcome centres for women and children in Munich. And it made me even more ashamed to be British to see how the Germans are doing this. And I learnt there also about how child refugees are welcomed, and that they are their key people, so unaccompanied children, their key contact points when they arrive in Germany are the youth service. And I tried to imagine that happening here. And of course it can't happen here because we've destroyed our youth service. We don't have our youth service because austerity killed it, like it killed the libraries, like it killed our community centres, like it killed women's aid, like it's killed education after school and preschool clubs. So I think it's very important when we not to say, oh, look what the EU did to refugees, because I've also I went to Malta with, I was in Malta I'm on the Africa, Caribbean and Pacific delegation. So I also have something to say about the Commonwealth as well. But regarding, we went to Malta where we went to meet with the Migration Agency. And I have to tell you that the EU is doing lots, but this country will never report it. There is so much happening. There is so much money going into so many really compassionate programs, but it's not an endless pot. And while different member states are not doing their duty, other member states have to step up to the mark. So let's tell the true story.
Migrants, you get all the pictures from the camps in Calais of all these men trying to get onto lorries and trying to cross over into Britain. Do you think that if there'd been more of a kind of female form of Brexit, effectively, where it was highlighted that all these women that work within the NHS, all these women that work in the care profession, perhaps the vote could have gone a different way if people could see what migrants bring to our communities and to our country?
Yeah, I think the media is to blame for a lot of it, for the negative press, basically. Look at the statistics. For the artwork that I've been doing, I've produced an installation showing the financial impact that migrants have, the financial contribution that they're making, not only in the UK but around the world. Why aren't we seeing these statistics in the media? Something like 13 billion from overseas students every year in the UK. What's going to happen to that money once Brexit happens? It's a fact that migrants contribute more in taxes than they're taking benefits. I've never heard that in a news report.
Yasmin, your sort of views on that as well?
Well, no, I think it's true, and it's not. It's my industry as well as politicians. No politician today, from left to right, has the courage to come onto any program and properly stand up for not just today's migrants, but yesterday's migrants and the migrants from way back. Did you know? Let me tell you a couple of facts. There are more American migrants in Britain today than there are Jamaicans. Did you know that? We don't seem to mind that. They came during the era of George W. Bush. A lot of them have made their homes here, and I'm not against Americans making their homes here, but we panic about certain groups of people, and we don't panic about others. There's also, I think, this cowardice in Labour, which really is beginning to get to me, because once upon a time, we had cowards before in Labour Party. In 1968, the most racist piece of legislation this country has ever passed was passed by a Labour government. And that said, even if you had a British passport, basically if you were not white, you couldn't come here without a visa. So they handed out these passports at the end of colonialism, thinking, oh, we'll have a virtual empire still. But hey, only Australians, white Australians, and white New Zealanders, and white ex-Rhodesians, now Zimbabweans, and South Africans can come freely and go freely. But if you didn't have a father, a parent, or a grandparent born here, you always have to have a visa. This is the Labour Party. So cowardice is not new in the Labour Party. But at this crucial moment, when we've got the Calais situation, when we've got this catastrophic situation, sort of almost coming up to levels of the Second World War in terms of victims and suffering, the Labour Party says so little on it. I find that shocking. And the other thing is, the thing that consoles me is that we have to remember this has always gone on. The myth is that this country really looked after refugees. It's been such a welcoming place for refugees. And may I just read, there's this extraordinary poem in a book that I helped with many years ago called Celebrating Sanctuary. And one of the most extraordinary poets, English poets, was W.H. Auden, who was gay. But he was also incredibly humane. So he married a German woman so she could stay here. It was an illegal marriage of convenience. And this is a poem he wrote, and I think it speaks to me, and I hope it speaks to you. Say the city has 1 million souls. Some are living in mansions, some are living in holes. Yet there's no place for us, my dear. Yet there's no place for us. Once we had a country, he's talking about Germany, the exiles from Germany, and we thought it fair. Look in the atlas and you'll find it there. We cannot go there now, my dear. We cannot go there. The man banged on the table and said, if you've got no passport, you're officially dead. But we're still alive, my dear. We're still alive. And so it goes on. This happened when the refugees came from the terrible, ovens of Europe. This happened when we came. Now they love Ugandan nations. Why, even Farage told me, we love you. When we came, oh my God, it was like we were cockroaches, using Katie Hopkins' famous words. They hated us. But then what happened next was everybody else except me became a millionaire and therefore gave money to the political parties. Oh my God, Ugandan nations, best ever. Don't fall for this.
Tells background.
Yes.
Yeah.
You didn't become a millionaire either, except for us.
I'm a journalist, so no way. Khalid, your response to the criticism about the Labour Party and the way they're behaving?
I'm not going to rise to that. I think basically, look, within the environment that we have to work, in terms of the children coming through, we voted, we pushed it through the government. The executive then still refused to do that. We've had a huge amount of debates in relation to try and deal with that. We do that continuously. The immigration policy we condemn regularly in the way that they're doing it. It's not good enough for Yasmin, it never will be. And I'm sorry about that, but that's the way things are in order to get this through. At the end of the day, as a political party, we have to do the best that we can, and in order for us to be able to do any good, we have to be elected in government to do that, and that's the option that we take.
I just want to respond to what you said about no politician is brave enough. Well, if the BBC asked me, if they bothered to have somebody other than Nigel Farage or Dan Hannan actually on BBC Question Time, you would hear some different voices, actually. And I think it's absolutely shameful that the BBC have continued to give oxygen to somebody who, as a schoolboy, was outed by his teachers as being a Nazi.
So, to talk about refugees and asylum seekers, I don't know how many of you know this, maybe most of you do, but the treatment of refugees, male and female, I'm not going to distinguish between suffering males and suffering females, in our detention centres, should have us before the European Court of Human Rights. They're on hunger strike at the moment. It's the 10th day. There's a blackout on the news media. Only Diane Abbott, who is an honourable politician, and Shami Chakrabarti managed to go and see. Why are you doing this? I'm not at a football match, I'm speaking.
You criticise the party at the same time, and then you're saying they're not Labour.
They're the only politicians who recently, there are some honourable individuals,
yes,
okay?
For the Labour Party.
But, and actually in other parties too.
Oh, good.
Who, I'm not here about fighting your political battles. We're here to talk about a serious thing. I don't care about your party. I care about the humanity of these people. Okay? So they're on hunger strike. I have been to Yarlswood. I have seen children who are 6 years old who have been cutting themselves so badly that some of them nearly bled to death. I want there to rise out of this meeting a campaign for those people, because there is a human cost that we're not talking about. The human cost of making, as Theresa May said, a hostile environment for incomers. Those were her words when she was in the Home Office. She wanted to create a hostile environment to discourage people by punishing them, by putting them in detention centres. So if you do nothing else at the end of tonight, do something about this. Collar your MPs. This is not acceptable in a civilized, so-called civilized nation. And because they're so silent, now because they're on hunger strike, they're secretly being deported on special flights. And nobody knows about it because none of us is allowed to go in there. All right?
Salma, just move on that point. You have worked around the world in places like Chad, Somalia, Yemen, with refugees, first-hand knowledge. Why is it that refugees are so desperate to come here? What is their view of Britain when you first meet them? What's their view of Britain when they arrive here? How they're being treated? When they get here, how do their views change?
Yeah, I mean, having lived in, I've lived and worked for the UN all over the world for 10 or 12 years. I started in Pakistan and Afghanistan when there was a massive refugee crisis in 2000. And in Pakistan, on the Afghan-Pakistan border, people living in horrendous conditions, living nothing to eat, horrendous camps, no health care, no hygiene, no hope basically. So people are fleeing. You probably see the pictures on TV, but if you're not actually there and you're not living it and breathing it, I don't think you really understand, because you can just turn away. But when you see how people cope, in their situations, it's really quite horrific. So for me, I understand totally why they want to leave and get on a plane and get somewhere better. But, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? The grass is always greener. Is it better for them here? Well, the women I've been working with in the West Midlands, I've heard horrendous stories of how they have to cope, once they get here, in terms of being an asylum seeker, for example, moving up to 10 times in a space of a few years. You're sent to a G4S house, and you just don't know how long you're going to be there. You may be sharing with God knows who. You may have young children. There's another lady who was taken into prison, Holloway prison, while she was pregnant and kept there. It's just as horrendous on the other side for a lot of them. People think they can come here and claim benefits, etc. There's that old story about people coming here just to live off the benefits, but that in reality doesn't happen. So it's quite tragic on both sides of the story.
I've just come back from Uganda, just quickly. I was making a radio program because it's 45 years since we were thrown out. And here's what I saw. Uganda is not one of the richest countries in the world. The north of Uganda, the government has given every refugee who flees to the north of Uganda from South Sudan and from the Congo and from Rwanda previously, a plot of land. I went to a school for refugees, which I can't describe to you, the extraordinary school that they've set up for refugee children, with equipment, with wonderful teachers, giving these children back their lives and dignity. You said about shame. I came back feeling utterly, utterly ashamed that we are the 6th richest country in the world, and Uganda is doing 1,000 times more than we ever did for those people who have to flee. Nobody wants to flee. Julie,
I wanted to talk, first of all, for me, one of the saddest things about what's happening is the terrible waste of human capital, that when people arrive, they're not doing anything. And many of the people who are fleeing, particularly, the people who are fleeing from Syria was a very well-developed society. So, the refugees that I met in Calais had been doctors, had been businessmen, had been nurses, had been teachers. They had had all these lives. They'd had a whole kind of society. And what people have done, they found themselves, their education has been interrupted, their aspirational lives have been interrupted, they're not able to do anything anymore.
How are migrants integrating within the UK? And what's the sort of bigger picture involving extremism as well?
Well, there's a real difficult issue at the moment with any people of colour in trying to integrate. We have set our community up, our people up, our cities and towns and villages up to hate anybody who's from the outside. That is where we're at. And I did a Newsnight program when the jungle was being shut down. And the only thing I referred to there was the issue of us treating people like humans and we weren't doing that. We're not doing that here because we've put even people, sons and daughters of migrants who come here, who are now against the new people, as Jasmine has already said, in order to deal with that. We're not doing. We have turned our whole community through the media and through some of the politicians who've done that, is to hate anybody who's not saying, because they're taking things away from them. And that's the real problem in terms of generally about integration, trying to get anybody to integrate. Now, then comes the problem. You walking around with a hijab, and therefore you're a terrorist. That's the next problem. And at the same time, we've got organisations that are based here within the UK who want primary school girls to wear a hijab. Now, how does somebody in this room conceive that? I've spoken to my colleagues, socialists who understand the issues of what's going on, and I can't explain to them that if you put a 4-year-old girl into a hijab, what her life chances and what her ability to integrate are going to be, how they're going to be damaged to do that. And the problem with that is that they will say that, oh well, their mother wears it, so therefore she's just following the patterns of her mother. They will say that, you know, this is religion. First of all, it's not at all religious in order to do that. But we've got a huge amount of people that are supporting that. What it does is two things. In terms of radicalization, it actually pushes, isolates young girls away from that. It takes them out of the education arena totally in the long run. And people will say, yeah, of course there are the girls wearing hijabs that go into university or sorts of places. But I see in Birmingham, those girls that are taken out of education at 15, I see girls who then are married off on the first date, after the 16th birthday, because of that permissive culture that allows them to do that, their parents to do that. And that is the damage that's caused by all this, and that's why integration is then limited, and also there are elements within the so-called Muslim communities, I don't see them as Muslims, who are pressurizing those parents to do more of that stuff.
What is it, you know, if you look at the example of the girls from Bethnal Green who went to become ISIS brides, you know, they left East London to go to Syria, a place they'd never been to before. You know, what is it that drives that though? Surely something is wrong within communities that drives that to think that girls have a better life being an ISIS bride than growing up in Tower Hamlets.
First of all, I think is they're sort of decoupling from the family structure, first of all. They don't see their parents as representing them. They don't see their parents understanding where they're at. And part of that is true, because the parents need to understand what young people are going through. So they evacuate that position. They allow then people who are through mosques and through other institutions and universities and schools and colleges, where these radicalized people get hold of these young girls. And they tell them they're different. They tell them that they have a different objective to achieve. And that then puts them in a different mindset. And they're going out to perform a religious duty. That's what they're going out for. The boys are slightly different, because they're going out to play their boys' games. They can have guns, they can go out and do whatever they want. They're lured into this perception. When most of the girls get there, most of the women get there, they find the horrific positions that they're placed in, but it's too late in most of the times for them to come back.
Can I just add, you know, it's what you're talking about, you just said, you know, the parents don't understand what situation the girls are in. What situation are they in? We're talking about an identity crisis that nobody wants to talk about.
That's right, yes.
Because these girls in Muslim communities, in Asian communities, there's a massive identity crisis that nobody is tackling. And that is the key to resolving this issue. And more women will get involved in extremist activities because they feel, you know, the new migrants that I'm dealing with in my projects, they feel isolated. So people who've been there, families who've been in this country for 50 years, I mean, what kind of isolation are they facing? And how have they been dealing with it over the years?